Good evening, I'm Alan Jackson and welcome to Nashville. All eyes remain on Iran, Israel, and the greater Mideast. Iran's nuclear production plants have been destroyed, but they still have hundreds, perhaps thousands of ballistic missiles. There's a ceasefire, but neither side appears content with having fired its last shot. Nevertheless, Iran's military has also been destroyed, and when they tried to hit the U.S. military base in Qatar yesterday, their missiles were blown up before they got anywhere close to the base. Does the Iranian leadership have a death wish? The Ayatollah is 86 and in bad health. Maybe he's having a hard time just coming to grips with such a humiliating loss. Or maybe he's not even fully aware of just how much he's lost in this accelerated fight with Israel and the U.S. This is how the president summed it up.
Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated.
Well, from that sign of strength from Washington to a much weakened dictatorship in Tehran, the Iranian people are most certainly weighing their options about whether they can rise up and push for new leadership. There's one wrinkle. The former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev, said that multiple countries might be ready to help arm Iran with nuclear weapons that they produce. Evil certainly has a way of finding more like-minded evil partners. But the truth is that the good guys make up a much larger group. And with that, I want to bring in tonight's expert. He's a first-time guest to our program from the Heritage Foundation, Daniel Flesch. Daniel, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We saw in your background that before joining Heritage, you were a senior advisor at Israel's permanent mission at the United Nations. And before that, a paratrooper with the IDF. Would you start by giving us your take on how things are militarily now that the U.S. has taken out 3 of the nuclear facilities and with all the strategic bombing that Israel has done to weaken Iran's military?
Well, certainly, Alan. Since Israel initiated Operation Rising Lion in the evening of June 12th, June 13th local time there, bluntly, I have not stopped smiling. It's been a military success through and through, and what is now called the 12-day war that culminated with, over the weekend, with Operation Midnight Hammer, with the United States getting involved and striking 3 key nuclear facilities. It's been a complete military success story and victory over the Iranians. Now, the question really is the politics now, what the future looks like. But Israel has certainly debilitated Iran's capacity to not only target Israel, because Iran largely posed a threefold threat to the region, Israel in particular, but also the United States. One is through its network of proxy organizations around the region, which includes Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and associated militias and terrorist groups in Syria, previously the Assad regime as well, in Syria, in Iraq. In addition, the ballistic missile arsenal that you've mentioned. And third, and perhaps most importantly, is the nuclear capacity. And we know what Israel's been doing on the proxy front, and we know since Operation Rising Lion, they've been destroying Iran's ballistic missile capacity and production capacity. And now with the United States' hammer blow, if you will, Saturday evening, Iran's nuclear production capacity is also significantly set back.
We had a current member of the IDF last week, and he said that despite the fatigue and the constant fighting since October 7th, that your colleagues have all stepped up quite willingly across Israel. Is that your experience as well?
Most certainly. Before October 7th, 2023, 2 things of note. One is actually Israel's security perspective was focused largely in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank against terrorist organizations there. They weren't really looking at Hamas or the broader regional threat. And secondly, if you can recall to a time in Israel before October 7th, the main domestic issue was about judicial reform. And that was almost tearing Israeli society apart, or at least so it appeared. It appeared that way to Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th invasion and massacre, and the leader of Hamas in Gaza up until his fortunate demise last fall at the hands of the IDF. But Israel is backed to a person with the fight against the Iranians. The fight against Iran's proxy groups around the region as well, but certainly there has been near unanimous support for Israel's fight against the Iranians. This does not fall along any sort of party or ideological lines, because Israelis recognize the immediacy of the threat the Iranians pose. And I must say as well, Iran's been at war with the United States since 1979. So this is not just an Israeli fight, it's also an American fight.
Well, I'd like to ask a political question. There were many times the past months that the Prime Minister was getting all sorts of criticism for his handling of the war. But now that the end may be near, has Bibi and his team received the support that he needs to finish this rather long cycle?
It's a bit of a complicated answer, because getting back to now, get to the politics of Israel's execution of the war in Gaza, and particularly because you still have 53 hostages. I think the last count, 53 hostages, about 20 of whom are confirmed dead, I believe the current count is. There's still a dual goal that the government has in respect to Gaza. One is to ensure that Hamas no longer is a governing force, and that Gaza cannot pose a threat to Israel. And two is to secure the rescue of the hostages. And so there's people in Israel who prefer one versus the other for a variety of good and bad reasons. The way it goes, people are very complex. But this will now come back up to the fore. So the past 12 days, the past 2 weeks, has kind of been almost an interregnum period, if you will, in terms of the goodwill behind the Israeli government. But overall, people have come to appreciate, certainly, Netanyahu being able to handle at least the American government under Biden, navigating that complex political dynamics in the first about 14, 16 months of the war. And then now, returning to Gaza, Bibi's government has been holding. There were some thoughts that it might fall before the Iran operation. We might return to that, but overall, there is broad support for the Likud-led government.
Well, according to the White House, the Iranians gave the U.S. some notice ahead of the time they were sending missiles to the U.S. base in Qatar. President Trump responded by trying to open the door to some peace discussions. What do you make of what Iran meant with this early notice? Think it was just the prelude to the ceasefire?
In some ways, it almost enabled the ceasefire, because Iran is at least militarily defeated. There's no combating or going to toe-to-toe even with the United States, and much less Israel demonstrated that it achieved air supremacy over Western Iran within a couple days of its initial operation. And so the response from Iran, they had a few different options. I mean, in some ways, they had to do something. At the end of the day, recognize that this regime, since 1979, has made its chant of death to the United States and calling us the Great Satan, which also says death to Israel and calls them the Little Satan. It's not just a mantra, it's state policy. And for the United States to initiate Operation Midnight Hammer, which they bombed Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz facilities, they had to do something in some ways, almost at the very least as a face-saving gesture to their own people. Question is, what would they do? They could maximize their response, doing something as almost suicidal as mining the Straits of Hormuz to impede shipping through there, and also the export of oil and energy. They could also do a more full-scale attack against Israel, against the United States and our bases and assets in the region. But they chose this kind of small, low-scale response against the Al Udeid air base in Qatar, outside of Doha. Now, it's not insignificant that they attacked they launched missiles there, because even if you gave the U.S. and the Qataris advance warning, you're still launching deadly projectiles at American service members. And on the defensive side, you still have to trust in the capabilities of our air defense systems and interceptors to knock out those missiles. But these systems are not foolproof. Sometimes they do get through. But if you look back the last time that President Trump initiated a strong operation and a precise strike against the Iranians, it was in January 2020 when he took out Qasem Soleimani, the now deceased head of the IRGC. In response there, Iranian proxies launched missiles against bases in Iraq, American bases in Iraq. There were some service members who were wounded. No critical casualties or anything, but that was kind of a small, safe, face-saving gesture as well. So this was a kind of a calibrated response, but we should not lose sight of the fact they still put American troops in harm's way.
Well, Dan, if you will, please stay with us for another segment. During the break, the rest of you consider signing on to the ajnow.com. We got a simple link to send you an email for your thoughts on our show. You'll see all the new links to all the shows of the past many months. Share them with your friends. Help us spread the word. I'll be right back. How do we understand a world of turmoil and confusion and conflicting ideals? Well, I've written a new book that I think will help. It's called Angels, Demons, and You, Understanding Spiritual Influences in Our Lives. I don't believe a political understanding is sufficient to know what's happening in our world. We need to understand the spiritual forces that are impacting us every day. Well, I wrote this book to help you navigate that in a way that will bring God's victory into your life. Read it. I believe it'll be a blessing. We're back now with Daniel Flesch from the Heritage Foundation. You know, it's interesting to see how much of the rest of the world has stayed pretty quiet while Israel and the U.S. go after the terror regime in Tehran. What do you make of that?
Well, it's saddening and disheartening in some ways because Iran, again, is not just a threat to Israel. They're a threat to the Western world, to Western civilization, and they've been this way since 1979. I was telling some colleagues, imagine a world where the United States recognizing the immediacy of the threat from Iran, and Israel obviously recognizing that with Operation Rising Lion, their attacks on Iran. If the Western world were to galvanize to speak with one voice and one action against the Iranian regime, we have not seen that. To your point, there's been kind of a silence. And in fact, most of the chatter we've heard is from the United Nations castigating Israel for attacks on Iran, despite that Iran is intentionally targeting, or has been intentionally targeting, civilian sites in Israel. They're not targeting military bases in the desert where the F-35s and other planes that are used in these attacks are launching from. They're not targeting Israel's nuclear sites or anything like that. They're targeting Tel Aviv. And most of Israel, about 40% of the population of Israel, lives in a fairly confined space in the middle of the country around the Tel Aviv area. So if you fire something there, you're bound to hit, if you fire a missile there, you're bound to hit something, and that something is very likely to be a residential or civilian facility. And it's really unfortunate as we begin to cover it because it's really an abrogation of our moral duty in the West to be leaders and guides in this regard. But this is also kind of keeping with the track record of the world in general's response since the October 7th attack.
Well, President Trump put out a push for the Iranian people to drive what he called a Make Iran Great Again message. MAGA, he called it. It's an obvious twist on his MAGA movement. Do you think he's trying to push for a leadership change in Iran? Actually, a regime change, a terror regime change?
I think what the president doing there is speaking directly to the Ayatollah. I mean, I think he's saying to him a couple of things. One is, we know we've stopped short of replacing you, whatever that means. But also, it's not outside the realm of possibility that we will pursue that action one day. And it's true that nation-building, regime change, in America, we don't have the best recent history with that, and we should not be pursuing it, particularly as we've done the last 25 years. However, he's speaking to the Ayatollah. He did that a couple of weeks ago when he was in the Situation Room and said, unconditional surrender. Another tweet said something to the effect of, we're not going to take you out, Ayatollah, but we know where you are. We can if we want to, and that's very much the case. Israel's certainly not pushing for regime change. They don't have the capacity or the interest or the will to do so. But it's also saying to the Iranian people, and one thing you saw the last couple of days of Israeli strikes was targeting not so much military sites in terms of ballistic missile production facilities or launching pads, et cetera, or nuclear sites. They're actually targeting regime sites. The State Broadcasting Network, the IRGC headquarters. Iran actually has a doomsday clock in Tehran where they do a countdown to the supposed destruction of Israel in 2040. Israel destroyed that. These are very symbolic gestures showing to the Iranian people the regime is weakened. It's as weak as it's ever been. And your comment or your mentioning of the president's tweet, it's on the Iranian people, of which most are opposed to this regime, and they're intelligent, largely Western individual society. They should be and can be the best of friends to the United States and to Israel and to the Western world. The only thing preventing that is the regime. Now that the regime is significantly weakened, we can hope and pray, but we can also take some action to support the Iranian people in their hopeful, intentional or one day intended bid to reclaim their country.
Well, before we run out of time, can you look past the next few weeks and imagine what could come of a Mideast without terror gang running Iran? A future with several countries working together on issues that affect each of them? What do you think is really possible?
Well, at the risk of the last few weeks showing that we can't really look past the next couple of days in the Middle East, I will say that, particularly the Heritage Foundation, one thing we're focused a lot on is normalization. This was a great legacy of the president's first term with the Abraham Accords, and we want to work on expanding that circle of normalization, which we think is very much possible. And the president, I think, also as well. So looking past the next few weeks or months or years, there's already been chatter about which are the next countries to be brought into the Abraham Accords. It's effectively a new Middle East. I mentioned earlier the Assad regime is no longer in Syria. Syria is kind of a basket case right now. It remains to be seen who's going to rise out of those ashes. But Lebanon's a different situation with Hezbollah effectively destroyed there, or at least set back significantly. Iran is as vulnerable and weak as it's ever been. There's really a new opportunity for peace and normalization. And I'm not saying peace, people are going to be singing kumbaya together, but actually recognizing that there's common interests and common opportunities between Israel and the Arab countries, and really the Arab countries with Israel. That is certainly a possibility, something we could all work and hope for.
Well, Daniel Flesch, thank you for your time today. We'll have you back again when things clear up a bit on the ground.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, in a moment, my thoughts on a region ready for hope. Hey, I want to give you a personal invitation to join my podcast, Culture and Christianity.
For a person to think that the Bible is not political, you don't know the Bible.
We're trying to understand how to take our faith outside the walls of the church and live it out in the marketplace.
He will show you what to do, whether it's in our communities, in our country, or other places in the world.
So I brought in some friends, some people that are trying to do this.
How could anyone call themselves Christian and be pro-choice is beyond my comprehension.
But I think he wanted them open and in need of him every day.
We have been living through a season of unprecedented deception, propaganda, manipulation.
Everybody says, Israel is attacking schools in the Gaza Strip.
I want to be a part of seeing culture and Christianity intersect. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Iran has long declared its intent. Their leaders openly chant, "Death to Israel, death to America." That's not political rhetoric, that's a declaration of war. And when someone tells you they want to destroy you, believe them. Iran has poured billions of dollars annually into Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. These are terrorist organizations, instruments of destruction. They're trained and armed to attack Israel and to massacre the Jewish people. The rockets raining down on Israeli cities that caused families to flee into bomb shelters, they were supplied by Iran. Hezbollah's rockets from the north, Iranian, Hamas rockets from the south, Iran helped develop them. Iran doesn't hide its ambitions. They call Israel a cancerous tumor. And we saw what evil personified looks like on October 7th in 2023. It wasn't human behavior. Animals treat each other better. While Israeli fathers and mothers wept with grief, the Iranian mullahs, they rejoiced. Now add to this the disturbing fact that previous White House administrations were complicit in enabling Iran. The Obama administration lifted economic sanctions, giving Iran access to several billions in previously frozen overseas assets. Funds that Iran used in part to bolster terror proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah. Under President Biden, the U.S. reversed Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran, easing enforcement of oil sanctions and allowing Iran to export billions of dollars in crude oil. Well, I believe that God showed mercy in the last election by giving us a pro-Israel administration that is course-corrected on policies towards the enemies of Israel and America. President Trump, he took decisive action when he saw the window of opportunity to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. The results of all of that? He potentially prevented a nuclear holocaust for the Jewish people in the future. You and I, we can pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for wisdom for our leaders to make choices that bring God's blessings to our nation and to our homes. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. I'll be back with your emails in just a moment. Welcome back to our program. Just a reminder, if you ever miss an episode, you can always go to ajnow.com. There's an archive there of all the programs. They're easy to watch and even share a link with a friend. And thank you for your emails. Dina emailed, some people say that Israel of today is not the Israel God tells us to pray for, and that the Jews of today are not the Jewish nation that the Bible says to pray for. Other than praying, what can I say? You know, I get that question quite a bit. There's kind of a fancy word for that denial of the modern state of Israel being biblical. It's called replacement theology. And behind it is the rather arrogant, unbiblical notion that any place you read Israel, you can just pencil in Christian or church. It's bad theology. It'll lead you towards bad outcomes. And fueling it all, I believe, is the spirit of Antichrist. I think you can love the people that have a wrong idea, but I'd share the scripture with them and encourage them to prayerfully consider what God's word says. Brian from Eastvale, California says, thank you for addressing illegal immigration. My wife and I paid all the fees, filled out all the forms, and waited through all the long lines to bring her into the U.S. legally. It's disrespectful to all of those who legally immigrated to allow illegals to do anything less than we did. If I tried to run across the border of my wife's home country, I'd be shot dead, no doubt. Well, Brian, I think you're exactly right. I think we dishonor all of the people who participate in the system that's been built when we encourage millions of people to behave illegally. It's not a love for country, it's not compassion, it's fostering lawlessness, and we shouldn't do it. Thank you for the reminder. And finally, Don emailed, I was impressed by your messaging on Wednesday, June 18th, presenting the history of Palestine. As a history major in college, I'd forgotten much of the facts and heritage of the region. I truly hope you'll encourage everybody on AJ Now to view this message. Well, Don, thanks for plugging my sermons. That doesn't happen a lot. We got to be reminded of the truth. There's too many confusing messages. It's one of the reasons we do this program. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us this evening. You keep choosing the truth, and God will move in our midst. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.